Good afternoon, everyone. We'll go ahead and begin. And thank you for joining us here this afternoon. Over the past several weeks, our school leaders and teachers have been working around the clock to prepare for the start of school, which officially began for some of our students this week, and for many of our students will start next week. Our educators have been busy preparing this year by participating in professional development sessions with their staff. They have been rethinking the distance learning methods and building unique opportunities to kick off this year in a totally and new and different way. I've asked several of our school leaders to come share how they have been preparing for this year, which is a year like no other, and we will welcome them to speak shortly this afternoon. But first, I want to highlight a few key topics I know that are top of mind for our community. First, I know especially during such uncertain times that our students, our families, educators, and community members may need reassurance about who is making sure that all standards and expectations that have been adopted to help keep our students and staff safe upon return to school, that they're being followed. I understand this as a parent as well as a former teacher. So let me just say this. It is our role at NOLAPS to ensure that all of our schools are meeting all expectations when serving our city's children. This crisis does not change our core responsibility here at NOLA Public Schools. We will be monitoring schools' adherence to the health and safety standards outlined within our reopening roadmap. Standards that not only match those that the state has laid out, but I just want to be clear about this, is that we have gone above and beyond them so that our teachers, our students, and staff will remain safe during a very difficult and truly uncertain times. Standards which have prioritized mandatory mask wearing before it was required by the state. And standards which our school leaders have embraced because they, more than anyone else, want to ensure that their students and their staff members remain safe during this time. Our roadmap gives them a clear and concrete path for which things must be adhered to keep our community protected when our school buildings reopen later this school year. And I believe if there is any public risk of safety at any point in time, I need everyone to know that I have the full authority to shut a school down at any time. I don't expect needing to exercise that authority, but if we have to, we will if the need be. Second, we heard a lot about COVID testing. I do want to share that my team has been working to learn best practices from across the nation with regards to COVID-19 testing in school setting. And we are convening leaders from the Louisiana Department of Health, the City Health Department, and major healthcare systems in the city to identify a comprehensive testing approach for our schools that will seek to provide back-to-school asymptomatic and symptomatic testing. We know that this is a critical step to get us back to in-person learning, and we are working on that. And then the third thing I want to share this afternoon is really around connectivity, specifically internet, which we have been very, very transparent about this since the very beginning of the crisis in March. Today, I am pleased to let our community know that our schools are actively closing the gap that still exists. Over the past month, nearly 6,000 hotspots have been purchased across our organization to support our family needs and our students. That's in addition to the 8,000, if you can recall, hotspots that were previously purchased and supplied by the district. We are getting closer to closing the digital divide among our students every day for this coming school year. And I'm so proud and invigorated by these efforts to connect and support our most needy students. We know that there's more work to be done as our students return to school, and as they prepare and come back, we have to continue to close that gap that still exists. I know our schools and our district team will work together to do whatever we need to do to make sure that our families and students have the support that they need. To learn more about such efforts and the excellent preparation and support underway for the start of the school year, as I stated earlier, I have invited several of our school leaders here today to share a snapshot of the work being done at the school level. I want to thank them personally this afternoon for their leadership, for your continued commitment to our NOLAPS community, and for taking the time today to step away from the schoolhouse to share this very, very important information with our community. First, let me welcome Joey Laroche, Chief Strategy Officer from Kipp, New Orleans, to share a few updates concerning the upcoming school year and how they are approaching the preparation for a year, like I said, that's like no other. But as educators, we know that we are educating our young people, and so we are going to do whatever is necessary to make sure that they have a successful year. So at this time, I'll yield to Mr. Joey Laroche. Joey?
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Again, I'm Joey Laroche, Chief Strategy Officer, Kipp New Orleans Schools. We serve in Kipp New Orleans Schools 6,200 students across 13 different schools. Unfortunately, we are still very much in a global pandemic, and that is felt and known by all of us in education. But we have known that this day was coming, that we would need to be thinking about the school reopening since the beginning of this pandemic, when it became clear that this was going to be more than just the initial month that our governor had us on a stay-at-home quarantine. We thus have had the late spring and all of the summer to prepare. And the way we have approached this work, and when I say we, I do mean we, all of us in the CMO community, all of us in the public school community in New Orleans, and I'm sure across the state as well. But the way we have prepared is we were prepared for every scenario so that we could execute on any scenario that would be present in front of us. We were prepared for an in-person return to school so that our students can be safe and learn, so that our teachers can be safe and develop their kids. We also are now prepared for a virtual start to the school year, and we are prepared for the reality that we might float between both of those scenarios in some fashion throughout the entirety of the school year. We are absolutely prepared for that because the strength of our system is that it is responsive and that we can eliminate the red tape and bureaucracy and work through real solutions for our people, our families, our teachers, our students together as CMO leaders and as teachers and as just educators to get to the right outcomes for kids. I want to reiterate that we are very much still in line with our core purpose, and our core purpose is academically excellent outcomes for students, but we certainly have to maintain safety for our students, safety for our teachers, safety for all of us as educators who have to be in buildings every day with each other. So just to give you a little insight on what it has looked like on the ground in schools this summer, but also in the coming weeks where we'll start to see a lot of the reopening activities. We have laid out several different plans and have gone through this with our teachers, have been engaged in trainings throughout the different summer for all of the scenarios. Today, many of our teachers in Kipp New Orleans, we have more than 800 employees in Kipp New Orleans. They are actively engaged today in model lessons for virtual teaching. That is what is happening right now if you were to walk in any professional development session. They are also, with our operations teams, planning for our orientations, which will kick off next week. The orientations are important to make sure that students, one, get the technology that they need from the school buildings that they would have otherwise had if they were actually allowed to be present in the buildings. Any other academic materials that they need to provide a rich learning experience even though they will be at home. And then finally, to learn the online platforms that they will be using this fall or however long the virtual order lasts. And so we've learned a lot of lessons from our spring virtual learning time, and it's even better across the city for the fall. Students will get to participate in class with teachers. This is beyond office hours now. We're not in an emergency situation. We have been planning for what is coming in the coming weeks. So that is the importance of our orientation next week. And finally, just to build relationships with their teachers. This is critical. We all know that a kid is not going to learn anything from a teacher who they don't believe cares about them and has their well-being at heart. And so this is going to be a key time where students and families and teachers get to connect with one another to establish the trust that they need to execute a virtual learning situation to start the school year. We are prepared across our city and in Kipp, New Orleans to provide Chromebooks to our students. We in Kipp, New Orleans are one-to-one on our Chromebooks, so every student will have it so that they can do the individual work that they need to with their teachers in all of the different classes that they'll be taking. As Dr. Lewis said earlier, the surveys from our parents throughout the spring indicated that connectivity and wireless options are certainly one of the biggest barriers, and I know that is something that our city council and our mayor will be working on and stepping up to the plate with for all of our kids, in addition to our school district. In Kipp, New Orleans, we have to think about solutions for families because we have 13 different schools, which means we have siblings across many different grades. And so beyond the individual student level, we are thinking about families across the board. And what we know is families need it for a house. We don't need it for every kid. We don't need that connectivity solution for every kid. Our families have indicated to us that about 40% of them need a wireless solution. We have made sure, in addition with our district under Dr. Lewis's leadership, to that we have 50% we have MiFis for 50% of our kids to have extra surplus options, to have in case we need to swap things out, quickly throughout the school year while we're on the virtual setting. So we certainly have solutions. We certainly have backup solutions for the things that are in place, but I want to reiterate that that is a short-term solution, and we will certainly need longer-term solutions across the city to get connectivity in place across the city in case this looks like this is going to be a longer option. As I said earlier, we think about the school experience even though we're at the virtual scenario. And so while that is technology, kids still need access to different resources. And so we are preparing, our teachers are actively preparing backpacks with distance learning kits that include things like whiteboards and whiteboard markers so that they can engage in math. I got to see an example yesterday of a pre-K paraprofessional who was creating individualized erasers out of fabric to make sure that each one of her pre-K students had something cute and fun to engage in, just like they would have if they were in the classroom when they're doing math instruction. So people are finding really innovative solutions to this, and I think that it's also a strength of our system that we can be innovative and responsive to whatever the need is at the time. In Kipp, New Orleans, we also will be having a teacher advisor for every student to make sure that as you are finding problems with your connectivity or with your issues with doing distance learning, you have someone who's going to be there that you can go to for your to provide solutions for you throughout the time that we have this. And so we are very excited about kicking off with our kids. It's been a long time since we've been able to see them. If you were around for our professional developments with our teachers in our buildings, you would have seen that people are excited to be back together. They've missed each other. They've missed doing this work because people got into this work because of what is in their heart for kids. And so it's been a really interesting and energizing time for us despite the global pandemic that we are in right now. And so we are excited to kick off orientation and then virtual learning the following week. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what is happening in schools and shed some of the facts. And I'm going to kick it to Ms. Brown.
Thank you so much, Mr. Laroche. I just would like to echo many of the same things that Mr. Laroche shared with you all. I'm LaToya Brown, CEO of Audubon Schools. As you all know, as school becomes our next big frontier, how do we go back and reopen in a way that will support our students and families? We continue to focus on what are the most immediate and pressing needs. For our students and families, those most immediate and pressing needs are to ensure that we can give them a quality educational experience in whatever platform or mode is going to work in the times that we are currently in. We are prepared. We would like to stress this above all else. As Joey talked about, in the spring, we noticed that many families did not engage in the distance learning to the extent that we would have hoped because connectivity or technology were initial barriers. Our district, philanthropic partners, and the schools across the city very quickly jumped on solutions in order to address that issue. You will see at most schools that they've purchased technology so that we can have one-to-one access for families who require those. We are working very diligently with our partners across the city to provide connectivity solutions for families, and we are hopeful that very soon our city will be able to also propose a more longer-term solution for connectivity issues. At its core, as we think about what this fall will look like and how it will differ from what we've experienced in the spring, as Joey also mentioned, whereas the spring was an emergency situation, the fall is a return to our basics, what we do and what we do well, educate students. Although it may look different, we do not expect to have any less quality in the type of educational experience that students have. For us, that continues to be one of our top goals. Of course, health and safety remains a top priority for all of our school leaders and our district leaders, as well as our city leadership. In doing so, we are following all of the mandates and guidance that have been put out by all of the various federal, state, local agencies, as well as the school district. We are committed to ensuring the safest environment possible for all of our educators, our students, our staff, and anyone else who needs to come into our facilities in order to serve as children. When we think about some of the lessons learned from the spring to the fall, we have had to rethink how our expectations look in practice for the fall. Whereas during a normal school day, it may be our expectation that students are physically in the same space for 8 hours. That may look very different when students are engaging in a virtual situation. It doesn't mean that it's any less rigorous or any less engaging, but it does respect the fact that these are different times and there's a different mode of delivering instruction to students. We also want to make sure that we think about the needs of families. So in many cases, you will find that schools are offering both synchronous and asynchronous instruction for their students. This is to provide the type of flexibilities of families that will be necessary for all of us to come out on top in this very difficult situation. We also know that the start of school will look very different. However, one of the things that school leaders and our district have been talking about since March, when this pandemic initially had its major impact on us, is the need for flexibility. As Joey spoke about earlier, we have been focused on creating many different scenarios and plans to respond to those scenarios that will help us be able to pivot very quickly to meet the needs of our students. Whereas we talk about this virtual start to school, in many cases, it was not really a change from what we would teach students, but how that information would be relayed to students. We want to make sure that we are very clear about the fact that our expectations for students and what they will be taught has not been lowered in any way, shape, or form. We have merely rethought how we will deliver that instruction to our students. As we think about moving into in-person return, we are very much so having conversations about how we can safely do this for everyone who will be returning to the buildings. We are also thinking about opportunities for those families who choose a different mode of educational delivery. So schools have very big asks on their plates, and they are stepping up admirably to those asks. We especially want to thank our district leadership for continuing to have conversations and discourses with schools in order to think about what are the best way forward for all schools. There have been lots of exchanges of information, resources, best practices. Lots of conversations have been had. As Joey also mentioned, this is not something that we've just started to talk about, but it has been part of our conversations since day one of this pandemic. We are constantly thinking about how can we best support our students, even when we don't physically have the opportunity to interact with them on a day-to-day basis. I can think about what's going on in my schools right now. As you all may or may not know, my school is famous for its two unique programs, a Montessori program and a French language program. And although both of those curriculums are best known for their in-person engagement and interaction, our teachers are working extremely hard to figure out how to pivot that to be most effective for our students when they can't physically touch them or see them. Right now, if you go into some of our classrooms, especially our Montessori-based classrooms, you will see our teachers and teaching assistants working together to come up with almost disposable Montessori materials that we'll be able to distribute to families for their use at home. Because it's critically important to us that we don't lose those pieces of our curriculum which are most impressive and also that are most engaging for our students. The same within our French language program. You will find our teachers working together on videos that they can post and have available for students outside of their regular instruction to help them be able to engage in conversational French conversations so they won't lose the benefit of bilingual education. We are very incredibly proud of all the hard work that's taking place, not only at Audubon schools, but across the entire city. And we are confident that educators working together will come up with the best solutions to support our students, even in the midst of all the uncertainty. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll now turn it over to Ms. Pence.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Sabrina Pence, and I am the CEO at First Line Schools. I want to thank NOLA Public Schools for inviting me here today to talk a little bit about what this work looks like on the ground. And I want to start with the same message that we are prepared. We have been working all spring, all summer to make sure that we are prepared in our buildings. That started with making sure that we're prepared for safety. That's ensuring that we have good PPE, that we have lots and lots and lots of hand sanitizers, news stations, hand washing stations, making sure that we have plexiglass in the right places so that all of our staff and our students are safe as they begin a return to school. And as we have done that, we've been planning for every scenario. You've heard the same message from our other schools here, is that we have been saying, what does it look like if our students come back virtually? What does it look like if we have to return in a phase 2 scenario? What does it look like if we return in phase 3? And so we are ready to pivot between any of these scenarios. Right now, given that we are entering in a virtual scenario, we are working really hard to gear up for that. And the first part of that is, of course, keeping everybody safe. And so thinking through, what does this look like in a socially distant world where we are wearing masks and all of the protections that are in place? And when you walk into one of our schools, what you will see is prepping of materials. Very similar to what Joey talked about at Kipp. At First Line, we are also preparing bags that include technology, that include whiteboards, that include markers, that include novels, that include all the things that kids need so that they can access that. In the last day, we have already distributed materials to 800 families. And we are just making sure that they have what they need. And so to that point, we are also making sure that they have what they need when it comes to technology. We have also committed to making sure that every family that needs a device has a device. And we have worked on assessing the needs of our families when it comes to wireless connectivity. We've done surveys with families multiple times over the summer to see where they are when it comes to access. And about 20% of our families have indicated they needed additional wireless connectivity, and we are providing that for them. We also know that that's a short-term solution. Hotspots is not going to be the thing if we have to deal with this pandemic for a long time. We need a longer-term solution, and we are very encouraged by the work of our mayor and of city council to help figure that out. The other thing that we are thinking about and doing simultaneously as we are getting materials out to families is preparing for the launch of virtual learning and thinking about, what does school feel like in a virtual space? So the first thing that's really important for us is to engage our families and our teachers to see, what do we think we need to do? And so we have hosted several office hours, town halls, done surveys to get feedback about that. And I think the number one thing that we are hearing from people and that we are working on doing is to provide a space where we are building relationships with students and to launch social emotional learning when students return. We know the top thing that we need to do is that kids feel safe in their, whether it's a virtual space or a physical space. And having that connection with a teacher is one of the most important things. And so our teachers are thinking about, okay, they do this very, very like regularly and normally when we're in person, but what does that look like at a distance? And so we're doing training with our teachers about that and engaging them about how they can do that, and also asking families what do they want? What does that look like? We're also training our teachers right now. Professional development is happening about strong teaching techniques for digital learning, because as you've heard from our other folks, we learned a lot in the spring. At First Line, we also hosted a summer school for all of our students and used that as another way to learn more about what does distance learning look like and how can it be effective. And so with that, we have new software that we're using. We are focused very heavily on making sure that students receive feedback. We want kids to be able to turn in work and get feedback. And that's something that's the beauty of a digital platform that we can capitalize on. And we want to make sure that kids have access to the same high quality curriculum that they would always have. And so that's why they're getting their books and so forth now, so that they can engage in that way. And lastly, I think the other piece that we want to think about is making sure that kids and families come to school. And so we are calling everyone. We are sending out regular communications via social media, phone calls, text messages. We're having virtual family orientations because we want to make sure that everybody knows school is starting. It's not like the spring. It's not an emergency scenario. This is a virtual learning scenario, and we need everybody to be at school. And so with that, thank you very much. And I will turn it over back to Dr. Lewis.
Thank you again, Latoya, Sabrina, and Joy, for just representing the schools that we have here across the city of New Orleans, to give some insight to the preparation, the planning, and the hard work. And you've heard that this work that has taken place didn't start last week, didn't even start last month, but it started in the very beginning of this pandemic. And everyone knows here in the city of New Orleans, we have a very, very unique school system. But also you can see in this moment here of how the uniqueness of our system has allowed us, even our initial response to COVID-19, to come together in a very, not only just a unique way, but a way to be very, very responsive to our families as we're responding to the crisis initially. But then as you look at the preparation in which you heard today, being able to have school leaders and that have teams to come together, because weekly we bring our school leaders together in a very virtual way, of course, to actually bring them so that we can understand best practices, to have them to understand those things that they need to implement from the district standpoint, but it allowed them to connect, to share their resources, so that as we are now approaching some of our students being in school now, and many of our students returning to school next week, that you heard today, that school is school. Now, we're starting right now virtually, and we have to go through a process to understand how do you deliver the same expectation you have for any kid on any given day when it comes down to their education. How do you deliver those services virtually? And I believe you can see here today, in our community, I hope that you can see that our schools have done an amazing job to prepare us to have a very strong start to a school year that is like no other. And so again, it's going to take a community effort, because even though we're able to achieve this in this moment, as educators, we do know the importance of getting our students back in school. And in order to do that, we have to go through the same reminders that we are going to continue to say over and over and over again, because it matters. We have to wear those face coverings. We have to wash our hands as often as we can. We have to practice social distancing as often as we can. And if you feel sick, you have to stay home. These things are going to protect our community at large, but what it also is going to do for us in this moment is allow those numbers to continue to go down, and for us to get our students back in the school building with their teachers who they are so ready to actually embrace, right? We know that our young people, they love to hug on our teachers, right? And so we know that right now we're doing these virtual hugs, and even when we go back in the school year, we're going to have to also teach them virtual hugs, but we'll be able to actually be in the same room with our young people and be able to support them during a very, very challenging time. So again, I know as a school system, we're going to get through this, and I believe today, everyone has had an opportunity to hear from 3 of our school leaders who represent the entire NOLA Public School core, if you would, that great things are happening on behalf of our students. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Dominique. So I actually had an opportunity to speak to a parent this afternoon whose child has started already, and very impressed with the platform that the school is using. Again, you heard this afternoon where in March we were responding and coming in a very short time to figure out, okay, how do we continue to engage our students in instructions? Where now we have prepared for a strong start to a school year and have laid out the model that each individual school will be following. And so that conversation with the parent that I had today was very, very positive. And I think it was very, very enlightening for them to see how the school has actually pivoted from the initial response to COVID-19 to now how they're starting a brand new academic school year from the very start. Yes, so certainly, as we shared and even you heard today, when it comes down to the computers, I'll address that first of all. As we assess the shortfall, our schools have been able to make those purchases. So in the city of New Orleans, every single student that needs a computer, if they did not have it from the first round of computers that we did, the schools have made those purchases so that every student will have that device. It has also been shared that even if you are a family unit, it's not going to be a computer for the entire family, but each individual student will have their individual computer so that they're able to do their schoolwork. And then when it comes down to connectivity, you may have one Wi-Fi in the hotspot in the entire house to serve a family. But going back to the question right now, we initially, weeks ago, we had about 20% gap. Again, nearly 6,000 hotspots have been purchased. And what's happening right now is our schools are assessing to see where there's additional gap in between the schools themselves as well as our school system. We will make sure that we close that gap. So again, right now, our schools are going to assess, because what they did, they reevaluated and made purchases based on what they heard from their families and actually have made those purchases. But again, many times when you talk to a family member and they may say they have connectivity, they may be talking about the hotspot that's on the phone. We're not talking about that. We want that something that's separate, total, apart from the phone, so that we can know that the student can always connect. So again, that number is, I'm expecting to be way down, but again, there is a gap between our school and working with the school district. We will close that gap 100%. Right. So again, even when you come down to, like, our schools are also, just to be clear, our schools are also distributing computers at this time. So I don't want to say that all our families actually have their computers in hand. That work is still happening. And for some schools, there was a week delay across the nation with computers. And so that's why I'm continuing to say that the purchases have been made so that our students will be one-to-one here in the city of New Orleans, because we made those purchases, whether they're in hand right now. And then with the hotspots, again, we had about 20% gap. We made those purchases from the school leaders who are here today, and they share with you that's who made the 6,000 purchases to actually narrow that gap at this time. Yes, so definitely I'll have our school leaders to come up, but even as they are preparing to come, even as you think about band, for example, right? So it's going to be more difficult for band to happen when we actually are doing in-person learning than it actually is in the moment of virtual learning right now, right? But what I'm going to ask is Joy to come up first to talk more about how we're working with extracurricular activity. And then also, I know we have a lot of work around the socio-emotional well-being. I think that's also important to the extracurricular activities, because that's another major part that we focus in on here at NOLA Public Schools. Joy?
Thank you. So yes, this is similar to what LaToya said earlier. The expectations have not changed for our kids, and therefore for our teachers and their learning. And we have excellent arts educators in our schools and across our schools in this city, and you get to see some of that work displayed culturally in the fabric of this city. But they too, like any other teacher, have been talking about how do I actually set my class up to do this. And Dr. Lewis's point is a good one, and that is actually easier in the virtual world right now, because in an in-person scenario, for band in particular and choir, we would not be allowed to have those programs in an in-person setting until we were in phase 3, which of course no one in this room controls that aspect of that. So it's easier because they are able to do several things. I just was at John F. Kennedy High School, which is a Kipp, New Orleans school, and the band director there, Mr. Kipp Thomas, and their operations director and principal were working on checking out all of the instruments to kids, just like we have to do with technology, just like we have to do with the distance learning kits that we all have talked about. And so kids are able to pick up their instruments now as well. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a headache at home for families who have to hear brand new learned musicians play these instruments, but I would ask for some grace on behalf of all of the music educators around the city, for all the neighbors, when you are hearing it in your homes and in your neighborhoods, potentially at 10 a.m. So that is something that is happening. Art class is the same way. And music educators the same way, thinking about how do we think about the history of art? How do we think about the history of music? How do we get kids a different appreciation of it? The same way that we would in person anyway. I think we're having to lead with it a bit more now in a way that we didn't before. But I think what I heard as well from Sabrina with First Line and LaToya with Audubon is that all of us, and we know this because we're on the calls every week with all the other schools as well, I know we are speaking for everyone when we say this, we want kids to have really rich experiences. We are not at home because we're at home, we're just doing reading and math. No, our kids need all of their subjects, they need all of their enriching experiences, because we're developing whole children and whole New Orleanians in this process, and they need to still grow up to carry on the culture of this city, and that is incredibly important to us as school leaders and teachers to do that work. And so thank you for that question. I'm glad to be able to talk about it on behalf of music educators and arts educators around the city. The same is happening with PE and such and all those things. Thanks. Yes. So as you know, and this is true for the whole system, when the roadmap for New Orleans Public Schools came out, every parent still has the option to choose virtual throughout the year. And so we will always, even in an in-person scenario, having to consider how do you teach the kids that are going to be at home in all of the subjects that they will have. Schools are doing it in very different ways, and again, speaking to the responsiveness of our system, in that this is not a bureaucracy deciding what happens for an individual family. These are the people closest to families deciding what happens for families. One school, for instance, this is not all schools, but one school that I spoke to, school leader I spoke to yesterday, he is having pretty much all electives on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the first couple of weeks, because he wants kids to have time to get acclimated to those very different structures. We find it maybe a little easier to do reading and math and social studies at home. So we're going to prioritize some of the enrichments in the beginning at those schools just for a couple of days, so that they get a lot of time on how to do this virtually, because it's more unfamiliar, because we didn't do that kind of thing in the spring because we were in an emergency situation. Now, needing to offer so many robust options, we have to have that plan. But we already were having to think about that, because some kids are going to be hybrid all year, while others are in person. There are also other classes that even when we go in person, the class will still be virtual for a variety of reasons, to get more kids in the class, that we can have them in different rooms, even though the teacher who's teaching it is going to be in one room with a certain group of kids if we were in person. So people are already thinking, as I said, of like all the different scenarios, so that we can prepare for whichever one we have to operate in, and whichever one serves our kids and families the best.
So I don't know about competitive, but I will say, as superintendents here in the state of Louisiana, we're set up in various ways. So the first way is that we have the Louisiana Superintendents Association, where all superintendents across the state of Louisiana are members. And we recently had our summer conference, which actually some individuals were there in person, and then some members were able to attend the conference virtually. And in addition to that, as superintendent, and this all is outside of COVID-19, we also have where each the state of Louisiana is divided into regions. And so there are regional superintendents in this area here that we all meet on a regular basis. And so actually now in response to COVID-19, our regional superintendents for this area, we meet weekly to really talk about the challenges that we are being faced with in our individual districts. We also have medical professionals that actually attend those meetings and give guidance to all those superintendents from that region. And so as a state, we are in this together. As we prepare our roadmap, for example, we shared our roadmap with the entire state of Louisiana because we have a way of sharing our resources. Again, you heard about the local resources sharing that's happening between all of our schools here in the city of New Orleans. That same sharing is happening at the state level with superintendents because what we know is even as we prepare our roadmap and other individuals may have still been processing and determining what was going to be in their roadmap, it gives you an opportunity to see what someone else has done, see where you may have missed something, where you feel is very, very important for your community to know. And so we've been able to help one another. And that's what it's going to take for the state of Louisiana, not just the city of New Orleans, but for the state of Louisiana to get through this crisis as we think about our young people that are educated in all the schools across the state of Louisiana. So I will say that one, we're fortunate that we are here in the city of New Orleans because I will say as a former superintendent in a rural school district, when it comes down to connectivity and as I talk about even across the state of Louisiana, there's some serious challenges there because if you're not close to a tower, you know, the connectivity may not be strong. But I also will share yesterday that this is going to be some growing pains. Yesterday, I was in my office presenting at the city council meeting, and my Wi-Fi connection was not strong at that moment. And so my team actually swapped my computer. We got on the a hotspot, and then I moved forward with the meeting. And so again, we know that those are going to be some challenges, and not just hotspots. We will have challenges, but what we know and we've heard from our school leaders is that we are going to have to, and we're up for the challenge, to troubleshoot all the challenges that we're going to be faced with. Because the Wi-Fi is a good example. Sometimes they go out, sometimes the connectivity won't be strong. Sometimes you have to move it to a certain part of the house for it to be strong. Like, we're gonna have to support our families to understand that, and then if there is a issue beyond that, then we're gonna have to figure out a solution to provide and support our families, because we're committed in this moment to make sure that our students are connected and that we're be able to support our families during this time. So again, it's too early to tell right now. We've been very, very clear of what our expectation, the metrics that are going to have to be met in order to have in-person learning. And so again, I'm going to continue to say that we have to wear our face masks. We have to wash our hands as often as we can. We have to practice social distancing. And if people are sick, they have to stay home, because our desire is to get and have our students and our teachers back in the school building so our kids, this creativity that you're hearing, because you have to recognize that there's a lot of energy to actually come up with this creativity, right? So it's so important for us to be able to get our educators back in our school building so actually they can have more time to focus on the teaching and learning because the students will be in the classroom. But again, it's too early to tell. Yes, so I'll ask our school leaders to come up to really just share how they are addressing what the expectation is for attire for virtual learning. But I will say this as superintendent of school, even I will speak, my daughter was in school last year. Of course, she has since graduated, but there were times that I had to also remind her of what she needed to wear for distance learning. And so again, it's important for us to set that expectation, because if we say school is school, then we also need to make sure that our students are signing on as that learner to engage with their teacher, because eventually they will transition back to school and will have to put on that uniform. And so I support our schools as they have shared with our families about the expectation for learning during these virtual days. And so I'll turn that over to Sabrina at this time to share what they're doing at First Line Schools.
So at First Line Schools, we had a series of surveys and office hours with families, and that was a clear concern that they had. And so we've made the decision to not require uniforms during virtual learning, because we know that there's a lot of financial hardship out there for families. And what we're communicating to families is make sure that kids are appropriately dressed for school. And so to make sure that they are school ready, but we want to be flexible with families in this time and make sure that we're really listening.
So again, we are in very challenging times here in the state of Louisiana. And as we talk about our school system here in the city of New Orleans, but I want to rest assure our community that our schools are ready and prepared to educate our students, even though we're starting the 2020-2021 school year from a virtual standpoint. I also will continue to ask our community to support our efforts as educators to be able to get our students back into our schools, because we are truly dedicated to continue to support the whole child. And part of that support actually need to lean towards in-person learning. And we want to be able to have, in the midst of a crisis, in-person learning as often as we can. There's no crystal ball. I cannot say what October is going to look like. Cannot say what December is going to look like. I cannot say what March of 2021 is going to look like. But when there is an opportunity, because the numbers are where they need to be, our kids can be in person, that's what we need to see. But it's going to have to be a community effort to make that happen. And if we don't do that, as we are starting the school year, then we may have to see virtual learning happening longer than we would anticipate. But again, we're asking our community to continue to support us as we work towards making sure that our students have the best possible school year that they can have in the midst of a global pandemic. So again, this concludes our press conference for today. Of course, as a school system, we will continue to come up regularly to provide these updates to our community, because we want to make sure that our community is well informed. And if there is something that you don't know, we're asking our community to please contact the school district or your child's school to get the exact information, because we don't want misinformation out there, because that all sets all of us back. Again, we thank you all for this opportunity, and again, this concludes our press conference.